anticipation that I welcome you to the opening of our exhibition, Benin Rooted History. I am speaking to you today not only as director of this museum, but also as co-curator of the exhibition, which was conceived and realized within the incredibly time span of only 6 months. As many of you know, this topic is very close to my heart and has accompanied my professional life for over 2 decades now. When it became clear in the course of this year that the restitution of Benin collections from the Mark and other German museums would finally happen in the very near future, we decided to present the entirety of our very special collection here in Hamburg for one last time. Not only to document its history and meanings to the best of our abilities, but also to mark the importance of the historic and very emotional moment. It is with deep gratitude that I would like to acknowledge my museum colleagues here at the Mark, who indulged my ambitious plans and turned them into reality under immense time pressure. This project would not have been possible without the Ministry of Culture and Media of the City of Hamburg and the commitment of Senator Brosda, who recognized the importance of this exhibition without much convincing and provided additional funding to enable its realization. I would also like to extend a very warm thank you to the Ernst von Siemens Kunststiftung for its generous support, and also to the Hubertus Wald Stiftung and the Herbert Pümplin Stiftung for their continuous support of our institution and their confidence in our programming. With tonight's event, we are not only marking a unique moment in the history of this museum and the city of Hamburg, we are also joining a major effort for the return of the Benin collections from German museums to Nigeria, specifically to Benin City. We hope this effort might serve as an act of reconciliation that will further strengthen a new culture of collaboration and mutual exchange, which is already underway. Other speakers tonight will address this important restitution endeavor in more detail. Let me therefore focus briefly on the exhibition and my personal investment in the subject. Exactly 20 years ago, as curator of the African collections at the Weltmuseum in Vienna, I visited Benin City and Nigeria for the first time. I was planning a large international exhibition on Benin and wanted to initiate a collaboration with the Royal Court and Nigerian museum colleagues while locally researching Benin art and history. It was during this first visit that the foundations were laid for relationships that have accompanied my professional life ever since and that have significantly shaped my knowledge of the Benin corpus. I am deeply indebted for the knowledge shared with me over the years in conversations with various Edo historians, chiefs, artists, and other knowledge holders, and for the supportive hospitality with which I have always been received. It was through my long-standing collegial friendship and collaboration with Natmayo Adediran, the former director of museums for the National Commission for Museums and Monuments in Nigeria, and Edith Ochole Kunke, who was then his assistant and until recently has served as director herself, that the initiative for the Benin Dialogue Group was in the beginning was first developed with the ultimate goal of working towards the return of Benin works of art. With its first meeting held in Vienna in 2010, the Benin Dialogue Group was in the beginning a space where the foundations for a trustful collaboration had to be built after decades of adversary positions. In the meantime, the Benin Dialogue Group has grown into a globally recognized entity that brought together European museums and in the next future also American ones, and the relevant Nigerian stakeholders to share and channel information, coordinate joint press communications, and advise museums worldwide about procedures and relevant contacts for returning works or contributing to the future museum in Benin City in other ways. While the Benin Dialogue Group certainly wasn't the only catalyst for recent developments, it did have its share in facilitating them by raising awareness and building partnership and trust throughout the years. One significant outcome of the Dialogue Group is the Digital Benin project, which has its founding seat here at the Mark in Hamburg, made possible by a generous grant from the Ernst von Siemens Kunststiftung, whose General Secretary, Dr. Martin Hörnes, is here with us today. The project is establishing an online platform to digitally reunite all Benin objects that were scattered all over the world after the looting of Benin City and Royal Palace during the British colonial invasion of 1897. The platform will serve as a major research tool in providing an overview of existing Benin holdings across the globe, associating them with oral histories and local knowledge, and in a future step with related archival materials and historic photographs. We started the project a year ago and are now collaborating with over 120 museums worldwide who submitted data on their Benin collections. The platform will go online by the end of 2022 and will in the future be hosted by the museum in Benin City, which is currently in the making. And all the collaborators of the Digital Benin project are here with us today, and they're sitting right there. The exhibition, Benin Looted History, presents the Benin collection of the Mark in its entirety. 178 objects are shown, including every little thing or fragment that had entered the museum and was catalogued as originating from the former Benin Kingdom. The exhibition also includes 3 major bronzes transferred to the Mark from the Museum für Kunst und Gewerbe in Hamburg under the leadership of Sabine Schulze, who is here today as well, in 2019, to hold them in trust until their final destiny would be clarified. They had once been acquired by Justus Brinkmann to represent the high quality of bronze casting in West Africa. As many of you might know, the founding director of the Museum of Arts and Crafts here in Hamburg played a key role in the German collecting euphoria of Benin works at the time and used his connections with the Hamburg trading networks to act as facilitator to distribute his works all over continental Europe. Although it was perfectly well known at the time that the Benin treasures were colonial loot, it did not inhibit museums and art connoisseurs from purchasing them anyway. Brinkmann also supported this museum, then known as the Museum für Völkerkunde, to build its very special collection with that same mindset. The holdings at the Mark are characterized not only by stunning works of court art, such as bronze reliefs, commemorative royal heads, and the monumental snake sculpture that once adorned the roofs of the royal palace. It also includes important historic artifacts, some unique Christian cross made in Benin from the 16th century among a variety of prominent and also less remarkable artifacts. Right after the opening of the museum building in 1912, the complete collection was shown in a permanent display and remained a major attraction for several years. Since then, only a selection of objects have been displayed in a variety of exhibitions. With this exhibition, we want to provide transparency about our collection by informing about their provenance history, beginning with the violent circumstances of their initial dispersal. We interpret the works based on research results generated over the last 100 years and recent knowledge contributed by practitioners and historians in Benin City. We further look at the Benin works in light of their value as a source of inspiration for contemporary artists. The exhibition addresses the trauma brought about by the absence of this looted cultural heritage in Benin City since 1897 and by the struggles for restitution in which 3 succeeding Edo generations were invested and whose efforts are only being rewarded today. Benin Royal art today is primarily known as an iconic example of colonial looted art, not only because of the sheer number of works dispersed all over the world, which add up to about 4,000 to 5,000 in total, but also because of the singular nature and quality of these works of art and their role as an historical archive, which testifies to the grandeur of one of the most powerful West African kingdoms in the 16th to the 18th century. Finally, we want to give a general public the opportunity to appreciate the collection and to share our current state of knowledge about it in anticipation of its imminent return to Benin City. Before I conclude, I would like to thank all my colleagues here at the museum who made this exhibition possible and who tirelessly contributed to its completion on top of other duties that couldn't be postponed. Karl Trisch and his exhibition installation team, Faride Fakasanati and her conservation restoration department, in particular Christiane Höger and Jana Gabler, Jimmy Dow, who was responsible for provenance research and its representation in the exhibition. And here I also would like to mention Silke Reuter, provenance researcher from the Museum für Kunst und Gewerbe, who consulted us and contributed her ample knowledge on Justus Brinkmann. We also thank the Museum für Hamburgische Geschichte for the loan of 2 items from the Wittenbergen shipwreck. We thank the agency Rono Creative in London, and particularly its director Hamed Adigun, for a special animation that provides a fantastic introduction to Benin history from a Nigerian perspective. A great thanks to Felicity Bodenstein from the Digital Benin Project, who closely collaborated with them and provided required content, but also contributed a chronology of the restitution history in the exhibition. I also thank the artists Minea Tairu and Victor E. Kamenor for their forthcoming in lending us 2 of their works on very short notice. Godfrey Ekhator-Obogie, whom you have seen dancing already before, who serves as principal researcher for the Digital Benin project in Benin City, deserves special mention for adding important insights from a Benin perspective. Anne Luther, project catalyst for Digital Benin, has also contributed crucial ideas to the exhibition. Imogen Coulson has helped with editing English language texts. Many of the contents we produced for the exhibition will also be integrated in the online platform. I would further like to credit Godfrey for his idea to commission a contemporary plaque from the noted bronze caster Phil Omodambe in Benin City, which represents a restitution scene from the 1930s and demonstrates the continuity of the Edo tradition to document important historical events in bronze. The commission of this work was graciously financed by our Friends Society. Max Guderian, Mitko Mitkov, and Stefan Fuchs, thank you for the beautiful design of the exhibition and for bearing with us throughout the tightly timed completion of it. Last but not least, I thank my student assistant for this project, Alexandra Daly. She must be somewhere behind there. Ali, without your support, endurance, and calm professionality, we would never have managed. Before I now hand over to Senator Brosda, I would like to finally introduce Ekhator-Obogie, who embellishes our opening ceremony with his unique performance of Edo song, and he is accompanied by members of the Hamburg Edo community, Alex Idele, Roslyn Simansky, Queen Olaisoye, Onifade Hakim, Adejumbo Oyeleye, and Tony Eyre. Thank you, Enotia, also for your long-standing collaboration within the Benin Dialogue Group, for your consultancy, and for agreeing to sing for us today. You all have a chance to hear more about Enotia's own art practice and Benin City as a vibrant center for contemporary art production at his artist talk tomorrow evening here in the museum at 6 p.m. Thank you all for coming and celebrating this special moment with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Brandensteiner, Your Excellency, dear Andreas Görgen, dear Professor Tijani, dear Godfrey, ladies and gentlemen. A story is only true when it is complete. This is how the Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie put it recently in her speech at the opening of the Ethnologisches Museum and the Museum für Asiatische Kunst in the Humboldt Forum in Berlin. And the opening of the exhibition Benin Looted History is not about writing the final chapter of the story, but rather about the recognition that a story can never be complete if it is told from the perspective of a supposedly omniscient narrator. We in Europe have created this misunderstanding, and we have maintained it for far too long. And so I'm delighted that we can meet here today with representatives from Nigeria, with representatives from the German federal government, with friends and supporters, with the people of the city, to engage with the origins and the artistic significance of the Benin artworks. These works and their journey point us to a context in world history that we should have clearly addressed before today. But because we have not done yet so in an adequate way, we are all the more obliged to live up to our responsibilities in the present and the future. At the end of the 19th century, the German Reich was the third largest colonial power in Europe. Hamburg, as an industrial and port city with its international trade connections, had cultivated the concept of being the gateway to the world. The city benefited from colonial trade and the structures of subjugation and exploitation in the colonies. The Benin artworks are an example of this. In the course of a British so-called punitive expedition in 1897, the artworks were stolen from the Royal Palace in Benin City and then traded, primarily to and then in Europe. The exhibition we are opening today also recounts the influential role that Hamburg's museum directors played in distributing the Benin artworks throughout the world. Today, in the 21st century, we are concerned with sharing knowledge about the artworks worldwide. In an age of globalization, discussions about our societies take place on a global stage. Ethnological museums are no longer exclusive showcases of the supposedly other. Instead, they are open places of encounter, at least that is their ambition. As a result, the way we look at the artworks on display in the museums has also changed. The works have always been carriers of meaning. Thus, the Benin bronzes not only tell a story of colonial subjugations, robbery, and destruction, they also embody the pride of a culture. They are unique artworks that reflect the power and importance of the Kingdom of Benin. They are truly of universal value. And so it is important that in exhibitions like this one, we always address the universal, artisanal and artistic significance. It is only then that the cultural exchange through the art that we want to promote will succeed. That is the story that we want to tell today. Provided, however, that we bring a chapter to a close. That is, that we will return ownership of the objects to where they originated, to Benin City in Nigeria. We must not skip this part of the story. We, as the city of Hamburg, will use all the means at our disposal to create the necessary conditions for restoring all the Benin objects located in Hamburg to Benin City. We will become a pacemaker of a post-colonial culture of remembrance. Hamburg committed itself to this task back in 2014. Since then, we have set a lot in motion. An apology to the Nama and Herero for the role of this city, which it played at the genocide of that time. The focused work with the advisory board and the round table on a remembrance concept for the city. And in the museums, focused work in the collections and exhibitions projects, such as the display of the 3 Benin bronzes a few years ago in the Museum for Crafts and Arts, the exhibition Grenzenlos Kolonialismus, Industrie und Widerstand in the Museum der Arbeit, or Hey Hamburg, kennst du Douala Mangabell here in the Mark. And now Benin, looted history, also at the Mark. All of which provide or have provided an opportunity for necessary and fruitful discussions. And they lay the foundations for more to come. Hamburg is working actively to return items from colonial burdened collections. We take responsibility. At the moment, the necessary contractual steps are being prepared in close cooperation between the German Foreign Ministry, the federal states, and the ethnological museums, and the Nigerian National Commission for Museums and Monuments. Firstly, we have to ensure that the legal ownership of the objects is transferred to the Nigerian state, completely and unconditionally. Our goal is to complete this task in 2022. Precisely when the first objects will be physically returned will be the subject of discussion with our Nigerian counterparts in that process.
Secondly, it is our responsibility, following the transfer of ownership of the objects, to keep them, if deemed necessary, here on loan and care for them should their owners so desire, which entails bringing them under the umbrella of the City of Hamburg liability. Thirdly, decisions on which objects will be returned to Nigeria will be made in consultation with the National Commission for Museums and Monuments and the individual museums. The aim is to ensure that the presence of and the knowledge about the artifacts is primarily available in their place of origin, and that the Western museums relinquish their fabricated prerogative of interpretation. One thing is certain: the physical voids that are thus created here in the museums also have a lot to say, and we have to tell the story of the future voids. And finally, and fourthly, we will work closely with the federal government to promote initiatives on cultural exchange and knowledge transfer so that German academics can do research in Nigeria and the Nigerian colleagues can do so in Germany and also here in Hamburg. Happily, it has been possible to speed up and intensify this process in recent years so that we are at this step at this point in time. In fact, the fact that we have reached this point today is thanks to many people. Since this is an introductory speech, I also have to mention a couple of thank yous. It is thanks to you, Your Excellency, Mr. Tuggar, in quite rightly invoking the obligation of German museums and politicians to return the artifacts to Benin. It is with great thanks that I say to Andreas Görgen and his relentless work with the Foreign Ministry in order to speed up this process and make the negotiation possible, even when there was still some sort of slight bureaucratic resistance within the federal government. It is also thanks to Barbara Frankensteiner and the Benin Dialogue Group, which for 10 years has tenaciously pursued the goal of injecting the topic into the international research and museum context and has always supported the negotiations constructively. It is thanks to the contributions of many scholars and artists from Africa and Europe that we have been able to considerably broaden our horizon of knowledge on the subject of restitution within a short period of time. I would like to recall here the pioneering work by Föderalen and Benedict Savoy, whose studies formed the basis for the French state's restitutions and played an influential role also in accelerating the debate here in Germany. It is thanks to the team of the Research Center here in Hamburg's post-colonial heritage, headed by Professor Zimmerer, that we have reached a level of research that conveys very soundly with aspects of the culture of remembrance we need to tackle in the coming years. And without the decades-long commitment of the African diaspora communities and the activists who have repeatedly raised the issue of decolonization and demanded it at various levels, it would not have been possible to shine a light into the blind spots of our difficult history. I would like to thank you expressly for your forbearance, your expertise, and your enduring willingness to engage in discourse. We need you all in this process of restitution, and we need you too in the process of reappraising our colonial heritage, which goes far beyond restitution. In this regard, we have already developed a key issues paper for decolonization in Hamburg, together with the Advisory Board on Decolonization, that represents the most important building block in respect of reappraising our colonial heritage. It identifies tasks and measures in many areas of society, including the areas of culture, academia, and education in particular, such as the recontextualization of colonial monuments, the renaming of colonial burdened street names, and the alteration of teaching materials. With support from the federal government, we will continue to expand international cooperation on researching colonial object inventories through the project Museums Lab. And today, through international collaborative projects such as Digital Benin, we already heard about it, initiated at MARC, we can already see how milestones of international research cooperation can also be created here in Hamburg. My desire is for projects of this kind to become more self-evident, and for us to come closer together in the context of colonial reappraisal and cultural exchange. It would be ideal if we succeeded in achieving a worldwide circulation of knowledge and objects, coupled with the opportunity for research across national boundaries. It is the first step to provide that cultural heritage is at its cultural origin. But the second, and I think in the end more important step, is to make it possible for these cultural heritages to be accessible all over the world for everybody. So in the end, the ideal vision at some point will be that paintings such as The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog by Caspar David Friedrich would find their way on loan from the Hamburger Kunsthalle to a museum on the African continent and to be available there, to be explored, experienced, and marveled at, and be put into a dialogue with the artifacts of culture and of the arts there. Only then we will have achieved what we set out to do, that artworks from everywhere, in their diversity, are appreciated, valued, and judged as equal. Only then we will fully appreciate Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's sentence, "The story is true only when it is complete." And as we read earlier on during the performance, the lines there, we saw and we found the truth we could read on the screen. That true freedom can only be in mutual giving and taking. For there to be harmony in this world, we must love each other as equals. If we understand that sentence, we might, in the end, sometime, be able to tell a truly universal story, but we need to tell it together. And today, we write an important chapter of the story. So thank you all very much for being here in Hamburg.
Your Excellency,
Ambassador of Nigeria, please.
Senator Carsten Brosda, Director General Andreas Görgen, Director General Professor Abba Tijani, Director Dr. Barbara Blankensteiner, members of the diplomatic corps here present, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I don't have a speech prepared because I want to speak as briefly as possible and also from the heart. Let me begin by saying how deeply moved I am to see a room such as this packed for one purpose: to witness and to celebrate the issue of the Benin bronzes and their ultimate return from whence they came. This, for me, as a Nigerian, is a very proud day, and it's a very moving day as well. I'm quite touched by this. And I say this because we're all aware of the extraordinary circumstances we're living in today. We're still facing a pandemic that has been coming in waves. Many of us have lost count of what number of wave we're in, whether it is the third or the fourth or the fifth in different parts of the world. And us coming together here just shows how important this subject is, and how, as human beings, we all recognize in this Anthropocene age that doing the right thing requires courage, it requires dedication. And this has also been demonstrated by the newly elected government, newly formed government of the Federal Republic of Germany, because that commitment to returning the Benin bronzes was once again reiterated. Because I have to say that those of us from Nigeria waited for the outcome of the elections and also the negotiations for the coalition agreement, forming the government with bated breath, because we weren't sure if what was started by very dedicated, courageous men and women was going to be continued. So we're happy to see that, and we're happy to see that Germany blazed a trail that encouraged others to follow the same path. As a matter of fact, Professor Tijani has been in receipt of several Benin bronzes, several pieces, because of the path that was blazed by Germany. So for me, I would say that Sonderweg, or the special path, need not be a negative thing. It can actually serve a very positive purpose, as it has, in this case. And in the case of the city of Hamburg, which has always been connected to the rest of the world, being part of the Hansa League, it is only to be expected that we will be having such an exhibition in the city of Hamburg, and that Hamburg has equally led the way within Germany to set such a very commendable example. the issue of ownership, as we all know, is something that, in spite of the interconnectivity that we have, the globalization, and living in a digital age with the internet, is still most germane, which is why today we have a situation where with the advent of non-fungible tokens, the issue of ownership is still being underscored. Even on the internet, where you're talking about images, you're talking about things that you can't touch or feel, even they have ownership attached to them. And with the agreements that nations forge between themselves, you also still have the issue of intellectual property, patents, copyright laws, and so on and so forth. So this, I think, is something that is worthy of consideration even further, but which is not to say that when ownership is established, that the knowledge, the skills that created the objects in question is not to be shared, or that the joy of watching such objects, such wonderful pieces produced by human beings, be they non-fungible tokens or indeed Benin bronzes, should not be shared globally. So I'm truly honored to have been invited to share this moment with you. I will not take any more of your time. Thank you for this opportunity, and I wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, the Nigerian Ambassador to Germany, distinguished Senator, Dr. Andres Görgen, Professor Frankensteiner, other distinguished guests, staff of the Mark Museum, ladies and gentlemen. I had earlier read my speech during the press conference, but instead of going to talk rather than reading the speech, I thought, like His Excellency Ambassador Tuggar, I would just taken a short time to talk. But I think if I follow his path, I think I'll even talk more. So I'm going to read my speech and then I will add a few lines. Hamburg is turning a new page in the annals of this great city-state. Hamburg has a great history known to the entire world. The greatest shipping port ever conceived by the mind of man. Through this port, Hamburg reached out to the rest of the world. It exported enlightenment, knowledge, machineries in manners unequaled by other cities. Through this port also, Hamburg took in the rest of the world, imbibing attributes and values that others cherished, mingling its history with that of others in the common pool of mankind, remaining always a leading light in our world, beckoning on others to share in its brilliant spirit. Some of the products of other clients that came into Hamburg were the Benin bronzes that were looted by the British soldiers in 1897. From Hamburg, they got distributed around Germany. The bronzes were ambassadors of the West African region. Through them, Europe developed a more profound respect for African arts. For several decades, many thronged the museums to catch a glimpse, but today Hamburg is bringing them all out, inviting everyone to have a final look, for they are going back to their cradle. Hamburg once again playing its leading role in shining its light like it has always done for centuries, is seen into the inevitable future, a future of restitution, where cultural objects that belong to others shall be returned to them. As the Director General of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments in Nigeria, the body established to cater for these cultural objects in Nigeria, I am indeed highly honored to be here today to share in the significance of the day. To us, these events mark the beginning of the return of the Benin bronzes to Nigeria. The significance cannot be underplayed. The event in preparation of return is taking place in Hamburg, the same city from which they initially entered Germany. It is commendable that Hamburg is displaying these antiquities in such a momentous manner while bidding them by. It tells of the noted enlightened spirit that pervades the Hamburg setting throughout its history. We thank Germany and Hamburg for the initiative to return the Benin bronzes in Germany to Nigeria. The announcement by Germany has proven to be the catalyst spurring other nations and institutions to the decisions to return the Benin bronzes in their whole. If Germany were to release all the Benin bronzes in Germany to Nigeria, they will not represent a considerable percentage of the Benin bronzes outside Nigeria. As we have in digital Benin, we are looking at getting to 4,000 to 5,000 Benin bronzes scattered around the world outside of Nigeria. So we thus call on other holders of Benin bronzes and other Nigerian antiquities to toe the path of Germany and return what rightfully belongs to Nigeria. Though ownership in these objects is being transferred to Nigeria, Nigeria welcomes collaborations, particularly traveling exhibitions, trade exhibitions, and loans. We welcome amity and oneness built on mutual respect and what some consider as misunderstandings among stakeholders in Nigeria are not of substance and are being resolved. As I said, These objects are living arts. Although a lot of people emphasize the artistic genius of these objects, but these objects to the Benin people, to Nigerians and Africans, they are living arts. They are objects of daily ritual, religious, and other endeavors in their original places. And therefore, the Benin people, just 2 days ago, I was in Benin at the Oba's Palace when we symbolically, signed a transfer agreement of 2 artifacts that we were able to get from Cambridge and Abba. You will see the gathering of people from different parts of the country, of Benin origin, that came to the palace that day to share their joy and their appreciation, to see that these objects have started coming back to Nigeria. There is no way I can describe the feelings of these people on that day. So you can see that the return of these objects back to Benin means a lot to these people. It means a lot to Nigerians, because this is part of their history, part of their identity, and part of their culture that has been away from them for decades. And to see these objects is a great joy that we cannot really describe it. And of course, despite these emotional feelings and attachment to these artifacts, we as museum professionals we still want to collaborate with our partners. We want to see that these objects, some of these objects, will continue to be displayed in museums in Germany and other parts of the world, because that is how the institution of the museum work, in partnership. And we look forward to Germany also partnering with us in areas of scholarship, research, capacity building, and joint exhibitions. I thank you very much for the invitation, and I bring the greetings of the Honorable Minister of Information and Culture, Alhaji Mohammed, the Oba of Benin himself, personally told me to come and greet you and thank you very much for what you have, the footsteps that you have taken, and other countries will follow suit. And greetings from the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. Thank you very much.
I introduce Dr. Andreas Görgen, Director for Culture and Media at the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Germany.
Dear Professor Frankensteiner, liebe Barbara, dear Senator Brosda, lieber Carsten, Excellency, dear Ambassador Tuggar, dear Yusuf, dear DG, dear Professor Tijani, dear Abba, to all our Nigerian friends and especially to Ekhator and to Godfrey, Obatokwe. Yes, sir! Well, I remember last time I was Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to me to represent today the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs and its cultural policies. Usually when we talk about international cultural policies, we draw a line, or it implies a distinction between what is inside and what is outside. This is strictly bound to our understanding of a national state in the European tradition. Yet, the premise of today is that the fundamental questions of the 21st century are what we called before external questions, and they have become internal questions. We're talking about sustainability, climate change, diversity, cultural identity. These are not longer questions which we should keep out of our nation, but they are part of our nation. So I want to remind why international cultural policies in Germany had been created. Historically, the Weimar Republic in 1920 was at the beginning of international cultural policies with a clear ambition that Germany might become again a member of the civilized nations. It was to stop the tradition of imperialism and colonialism after the First World War. And unfortunately for our country, after 1933 and 1945, we needed a second opportunity to become again member of the civilized nations. So cultural policies is to answer the call of humanity. And we have to be grateful to all the nations which reached out to us after 45 and made us again member of the civilized nations and member of humanity, to keep it short. So for today, we have to ask ourselves, what is the call for humanity of today? And I'm deeply convinced the call for humanity of today is equality, to share the global burdens, and to reach out to those who have suffered from history, who have suffered from injustice, and who are still suffering. Second aspect, which role to play for a federal government and foreign affairs, and which role to play for the civil society institutions. And this is to acknowledge the role of Barbara. There is an indispensable expertise in the museums, in academics, in the curatorial and in the international outreach of the museums, and especially here in Hamburg. Carsten Brosda has mentioned a few of them, so I keep it short and I only praise Barbara Plankensteiner, who had been, you may give a look to her. There's still hope for the world if women are leading it. So she has laid the ground for what we are doing today, not only here in Hamburg, but coming from Vienna, being called to Hamburg, and her engagement from the Benin Dialogue Group to the Legacy and Restoration Trust in Benin City. Her willingness of cooperation is a role model for what is done in the German museums, from the Raufenstrauch Museum in the Far West in Cologne to the Berlin museums and to the Linen Museum, where an exhibition will start not later than tomorrow. So thank you, Barbara. And I know, Barbara, that you know, that we all know, we are all standing on the shoulders of our predecessors. And I want here to acknowledge the pivotal role of Eyo Ekbo. Ekbo Eyo has been your predecessor here Abba, he has worked on the restitution of Benin bronzes from the 80s, and without his leadership, the world wouldn't know about the Benin bronzes. And I think, Barbara, it is the right moment to say yes, Ekhator-Obogie has been 40 years ago the frontrunner of all we are doing today. So thanks to the Nigerian leadership, also on the curatorial and the museum's questions. But this is in the institutions, but there is a need for the engagement of a civil society. So thank you for the Siemens Stiftung, but thank you to all the work the citizens of Hamburg have done. Without your support, without that participatory, democratic engagement to change a society and to lead a progress, nothing would be possible for the institutions. Institutions are made to secure. The engagement of the civil society is made to push forward. And this all leads me to Senator Brosda, because there is a role for politics, and it is a heavy burden for the politicians to shape what we call in German Allgemeinwohl, and to be responsible of leading a society to a new future. And dear Carsten, we have passed roughly 3 years of negotiation. From the first draft of the museums, how to deal with the objects of the colonial past, to that very, very German internal coordination between the Federal Minister of Culture, the Federal Ministers of Culture, the different institutions, the different directions, some reluctances, and yet, in a very German way, you have coordinated all those different political players, which has allowed me to travel 3 times to Nigeria this year. And it is your intellectual leadership, as you have shown us today in your speech. It is your political leadership, because you are standing in a tradition of progressive politics. And if I may say, it's your personal leadership. And I owe a lot to you, and foreign policies owes a lot to you. Thank you so much. My third preliminary remark is about the context of aesthetics and politics. There's no doubt that in our society are socially or state-sanctioned hierarchies which have an effect on our feelings, on our capacity to listen, and on our ways of thinking, and vice versa. New aesthetic experiences may change what we perceive politically or normatively. So there is a need for aesthetics, and there's a need of opening our hearts and minds to listen to other kinds of music, to read other kinds of stories, and to feel in other ways that we are trained and used to feel. And there is also a responsibility for cultural policies to allow these new experiences and to protect those rooms of artistic freedom, especially in front of those who tell us that we are a homogeneous country and that we have to exclude those who think in another way or feel in another way than Germans, so-called Germans, do since I don't know how many decades. So there is a responsibility for artistic freedom, and the rooms, these spaces of freedoms, have to be protected against those who will tell us other stories of a nation than we tell of a open, modern, and of a Germany which will be part of the civilized nations. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard we will proceed to the return of the objects. We have learned about the willingness and of the 3 steps Carsten has mentioned, and we will stay on your side. And please, if everybody tells you that this is a loss, it is not a loss. It is not a loss. It is paving the way for the future. And if somebody asks you, what is the reference to German culture? Then your mind reminds him the great speech of Sankara in 1984 in front of the United Nations, when he called for a progressive policy in an African country, and he finished his speech with a quote of Novalis. And that quote of Novalis goes, "The old times will come again, and history will be the dream of the present extended to the future." This is to say that German culture is open to that call of humanity, and this is what I want to leave here in Hamburg, and my great thanks to all of you.
Yes, and now our last speaker, but not the least one, Godfrey, Ekhator-Obogie, who contributed to our exhibition.
Was I alive when Obavorame was being deported? I was still in the spirit world. Had I been alive, none would have taken my king, Ovorame Nonvice. When you see the white man who took Ovorame on the ivory ship, he looks tiny, like a sting. And when I imagine the king of Ovorame Nonvice, who was being taken away, behold, he's as large as the water python. Ovorame Nonvice. Permit me, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to stand on the existing protocol. I am Osaisonor Godfrey Ekhator, a postgraduate researcher from the Institute for Benin Studies in Benin City. Greetings to our ancestors. Itwoma, Itwegele. Itwapoleke, Itwapanoro Eku. Itu anyone in the Numbena, to anyone in Yasun. Oh, Bagatome! Today, I'm privileged to pay tribute to Asoro, the page from Owatan. I salute the courage of Ebikiri, the untiring warrior of 1897. I honor the great strategists of Benin Kingdom who led guerrilla warfare for consistent 3 months. Chief Olobosere, Chief Ebon, who were executed by the British colonialists in 1899. I pay tribute to all the war veterans of the Anglo-Benin War of 1897. They took up their umuzu and fought in defense of Benin Kingdom with sweat and blood dripping from their forehead. I stretched my hand to pay homage to Oba Siri Eweka II. Eweka no Yudu, Eweka no Lugbe. The lion heart and the restorator of the homestead of Benin Kingdom, which is the Oba's palace. I salute Oba Orogbuyun Godfrey Akenzwa II, Oba Akenzwa Nisonoro, the rainy sky, who received the first repatriated objects of a beaded crown and dress, who encouraged the establishment of the first museum by Chief Jacob Owadiaye Egarewa. And in 1943, and the establishment of the National Museum in Benin in 1972. I also salute Oba Asiopoba Solomon Eridiawa, the learned, Oba Bakyan, Oba Latobe. I will rub my hands in obeisance to His Royal Majesty Oba Ewaye Ogidigan II, Oba Ilubowewe. In your reign, may the glory of Benin Kingdom come to its fullness. Oba Latobe. Ladies and gentlemen, every child born in Benin is told the story of Oba Orogbuyun, the British looting of Benin and the deportation of the Oba. With such nostalgia that leaves one devastated. So you can imagine, as a Benin boy, the nostalgia I felt growing up in Benin, hearing the story of the devastation and destruction that followed 1897. So you can imagine when my father narrated the story of my grandfather's experience with the events of February 1897. First, how more the throne of Orogbuyun, how he made him pay homage, obeisance, and suddenly a god king became mere mortal. The Benin people were devastated in the cyclone for years. This was not just the end, it was followed by years of disorganization of the more than 2,000 years of socio-economic and political grandeur What more can be disheartening than the loot that disrupted and destroyed and established aesthetic records as documentation of the essence of our being? This exhibition is not just presenting before us Benin objects, it's also reenacting for us the various aspects of the cultural values of Benin Kingdom. Then there is this contradiction arising from our thought experiences as a child. It was these experiences, among other things, that were some of the factors that led to the establishment of the Institute for Benin Studies by a group of concerned young scholars and professionals after the centenary celebration of the 1892 Geraubte Treaty in 1992 and the 1897 punitive expenditure in 1997. These young scholars sought to study, document, and as well as preserve and propagate the history, culture, tradition, and language of Benin Kingdom and Edo-speaking people. Indeed, they achieved this through individual research. They achieved this through seminars and workshops, and above all, through a biannual conference, which was in honor of the father of Benin history, Chief Dr. Ekhator-Obogie. There is no Benin scholar, no Nigerian scholar, no European scholar who have written anything about Benin without a reference to Ekhator-Obogie. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as a student of Benin history, it gives me pleasure that those who led this crusade after the 1997 centenary, one of them is ably seated among us here, Professor Mrs. Adetokunbo Uwakokunre at the time. As a postgraduate student and researcher, and a research fellow of the Institute for Benin Studies, I came to realize that there is more than 2,000 years of historical development prior to 1897, and whereas most of the debate and focus has always been about the devastation of 1897. But Benin scholars have not been deterred by that devastation. No. We have not been dissuaded. No. Rather, today, we are following in the footsteps of first-generation scholars like Professor Mrs. Maitama and the Institute for Benin Studies, where I have had my niche and little experience, is today mentoring young scholars who would take up the task to interpret these objects when they are returned to Benin, to read them and to reconstruct the history and give them meaning to the society where they belong. As a historian and being a co-curator in this exhibition, I have in my own little way brought my knowledge of Benin cultural history as aspects that I have brought my knowledge of Benin cultural history as aspects that are missing in the European contextualization of some of these cultural objects. As an exhibition that speaks to an entire collection that employs a multidimensional approach and is a curatorial collaboration between the museum and the community, this exhibition will be educative. Will be interesting to members of the Benin community, which is its origin. Will be interesting to the public and will be embraced by museum professionals who think of the museum of the future. On this note, our work in the Digital Benin project, which is coordinated by the MAC, affords us the experience that gives us the assurance that content of cultural and historical significance is key to reawakening the museum physical space and digital presence. Finally, I want to lend my voice to all those who have spoken before, to thank the German government, and to say on a personal note, I was one of those who were most elated and ran to my Twitter handle when His Excellency Ambassador Yusuf Tuggar wrote that eventful letter that contributed to this debate on that fateful day. We thank you very much, sir, for leading the crusade and joining our ancestors in this crusade. I thank Professor Barbara Plackensteiner, members and staff of different agencies in Germany and the MAC, my dynamic colleagues of the Digital Benin team. I pray, like I always do, may Osanudazi, Abba, Okodudu, Oriole, Osagbaye, may Osanogo Dua, may Osanogwa, and all our ancestors and Iyenowine of Benin Kingdom bless and guide all our endeavors and bring this journey to a fruitful and successful end. Thank you very much.
Oh, Bala, talk there.